What's up guys, and welcome back to Pop Beat Breakdowns. I'm back at you today with another beat breakdown. Today we're doing an acoustic pop ballad singer-songwriter type beat breakdown, but the reason I really wanted to show you this beat today is because there's some things, particularly in the structuring of productions, that I really wanted to share with you, because I think for anyone who's a beginner to an intermediate producer might find this very insightful and helpful when it comes to you building your own productions. So that is why we're breaking down this beat today. If you are new to this channel, smash that subscribe button right now, as it is the best way to support the channel. We're so close to 500 subscribers at this point. It has been crazy. Thank you for all the support to date. But with that mandatory out the way, let's not waste any more time. Let's get into Logic and let's break down this beat. Okay, so we're now in Logic and this is the production. So one thing I say at the start of all these videos is, one thing that I really like to do on this channel is structure the instruments down in the order that I added each individual element to production, because it's the best way that you beginner producers can understand how to build tracks. It's one of the things I really struggled with when I started learning how to produce music, was what order to actually add things in, then actually get into a workflow which worked for me, so over and over again, day by day, I can keep producing new beats for my type beat channel in a way that's consistent and not getting the production writer's block, if that makes sense. So today, the one thing that I started with was I went into Contact and I used the picked acoustic today. I started messing around with a couple of blends of different loops in here to create some acoustic guitar. Now, for those of you who don't know what this is again the picked acoustic session guitarist by Native Instruments. If you're someone who doesn't know how to play the guitar but wants guitar in your productions, I highly recommend this. When you get this in a deal, you can get this for around 40 quid, and it's great because not only can you have all these different loops, so if you I just press the key on the keyboard and it initiates a loop, but there's hundreds of different loops, and also there is a melody version, so you can actually play acoustic guitar on the piano, or on your keyboard rather. So it's really good to have, and it sounds great out the tin. So what I've done first is nothing too major. I've just stacked 4 different loops together. This isn't the groundbreaking part of what I'm trying to show you for this video, but this is how it started. So with this loop, this is where the idea first came up. When I found this loop, I decided that at this point I was going to do something on the acoustic pop ballad side. So that was my thought process. Then I had this loop as well. Slight variation, but similar. So when you add them together, you've got this really nice counter rhythm going on. Some harmonies. Again, if you have a guitar and you record acoustic guitar in, then this is kind of what you got to do. I always think don't just have one acoustic guitar, really stack your instruments, especially acoustic guitar, because you get these really nice counter rhythms going. So if you play the guitar, all this is so far, this is 2 different rhythms playing very similar in the same chords, and it just creates a little bit more movement in the production. And I didn't stop there, I added a third one. This is more of a sort of subtle power chords to add the energy to this. So at this point, when I'm building the acoustic guitar, I'm starting to get a feel for the chorus. But what sort of chorus this is going to be? It feels like it's going to be a little bit more high energy for an acoustic pop ballad, but I feel like it's something I could work with. So the next thing I added was this last acoustic guitar rhythm, just for the chorus. Now this is the strummed acoustic guitar 2, again by Native Instruments. Really, without being paid, I'm endorsing Native Instruments right now, but it's just really good if you don't play the guitar. I do play the guitar, but because I'm making a couple of beats a day, sometimes I honestly, not call it laziness, but it's just so easy, and it's one of them work smart, not hard kind of things that's going on here with the strummed acoustic. So I always find myself using it. It sounds great. So with this all together, we've really got the acoustic side of the chorus sorted. Now, because they're all following the same chord pattern, one thing I subtly did was on this acoustic guitar one, I actually put the last chord, which in this is an A, up an octave, so it went up, because everything's going, starts up, goes down, up fill, and then down, but this one went down, up, up, just so there's that little bit of variation so it doesn't sound too samey and too boring. Next then, we added some piano. So the whole thing about the piano is that I wanted it kind of just to lay down, cover the lows and the highs at the same time. Piano's going to be very good for that. For the actual sound of the piano today, I am using the Grandeur by Native Instruments, but the Steinway piano in Logic, if you're a Logic user stock, is also a very good option. I always recommend that if you use the Steinway piano, if I was to get up an EQ, I always recommend that you do a little bit of a lift in the high end of the frequencies, because I feel like it gives the starting with a little bit more chance to breathe because it can be quite mid heavy in terms of mixing, so just a little bit of advice. And I always like to break down my piano into 2 different tracks. So I have the lower piano and then my normal piano. This makes it really good to control the whole overall sound of the piano. So these ones are just the lower root notes that I've laid down first. More for the chorus. So now we've got the low end of the piano sorted, then I can go in and actually play the piano, because the piano would sound quite empty if I didn't have these lower notes in, and I'll show you both. But first, this is the piano. And then if we have it with the lower piano, it just sounds so much more full. And we can say the same if we're playing it with the acoustic guitars. So if we were to just play the acoustic guitars and the normal piano by itself, this is what we have. You think it sounds okay, but at the lower piano, all of a sudden there's a really nice stamp between each new chord that's introduced. It gives it more, again, that full feel. So yeah, so that's just one thing to consider when you're blending your acoustic guitar and piano into the mix. Especially first, you stack in acoustic guitars. Don't just have one acoustic guitar. And for the pianos, don't just focus too much on the 2 hands, like very narrow mid range of motion. Always think about the low end and the high end of the piano. It can really make a difference to how it sits in a mix. So then after that, we go to our first Logic preset. You'll be happy to know, for those of you who are liking the sounds from this, and that is the Solid Soul Electric Bass. Those of you who watch my videos regularly will know I'm a big fan of this, and even though most of the time for real bass I use the Rickenbacker by Native Instruments, the Solid Soul Electric Bass by Logic, the Logic stock, this is a great bass plugin. I highly recommend that you use it if you're looking for a good bass sound with MIDI. And it just sounds good out the tin, and it mixes really easily as well. Now it sounds very MIDI here, as you may have heard, but when you put it in context with the rest of the production, that MIDiness kind of goes away, and instead you've got the low end now completely covered with the lower piano and the Solid Soul bass. Played it all together, sounds like this. The whole idea, by the way, of doing this little rising melody towards the end before transitioning to the next note on the bass, this again is to start create a little bit of movement. Don't just be too blocky, especially if you're doing a 4-chord song. You really need to make sure that there's some movement in the melody, and that includes the root rhythm section of the bass. Because again, as I said, I've used a lot, movement and development, 2 things which are very crucial to a production, especially if you're going to be looping a lot. So it just adds a little bit of a good more feel to it. Which brings us on to the drums. Now the drums, this is probably the best bit of advice I can give you for MIDI drums. Always separate your individual elements into individual tracks. I cannot stress that enough. That is one of the most important things you have to do from a mix point of view, because if I was to record this drum beat that I've done here, I'm just going to play you it quickly so you can hear it. Again, it's a drum beat, but if I was to just record this into the same drum kit, this is a Logic drum kit by the way, the Brooklyn, and if I was just to record it all together and then mix it, you have so much less control over the EQing of the kick, the snare, the hi-hats, the toms and the crashes. These are 5 different elements and we want to capture all of them, so it's really important that we are separating them so we can individually mix the kick and then adjust the volume to how we want it. The snare, again, same thing, hi-hats, toms, and the crashes, because all of these individual elements are mixed differently. So if you're applying one EQ for everything, you're just not going to have as good a control as you want to. So with that in mind, I've separated into kick, snare, hi-hats, I should say hi-hats and crashes, because I mix the hi-hats and crashes very similarly, so I'm happy to keep them together, and the toms. So we start with the kick, the snare. So it just gives us the utmost control, especially because I haven't done too much this time around in terms of the EQing, but with the hi-hats and crashes, I want them at the sides of the mix because we don't want the whole drum kit down the middle. So with the hi-hats, I've added one of my favourite little things, the sample delay, to push the hi-hats and crashes out to the side of the mix. Having a delay of 112 milliseconds on the right side means that there's a bias to your left ear, meaning it's spread out to the side, but you hear the hi-hat first out the left, so it gives the perception that the hi-hat's at the left ear while being around you at the same time. It's probably the least complicated way. I probably could explain a bit more less complicated, but that's what sample delay does, and I love it for it. So look, if you've got headphones on, this is the difference. So this with the sample delay on, you hear it out to the sides. I actually noticed it's quite hard because there is a little bit of panning there already, but if you had headphones on, you could hear there's that little bit more of a nudge to push things out the side. The crash already is at the left side of the mix, which is why the crash wouldn't have turned. But the hi-hat, it just adds a little bit more of a spread, just to allow a little bit more space in the middle of the mix. So that's with the drums. So when you put this all together, you've got nearly what I would call a pretty decent production already. Very simple. But next we need to move on to the real ambience and the real sort of like emotion behind the song, and you can really get that now through any extra elements that you add. The next one that was really important to add was an organ. I had it in my head while I was hearing this, and this is the one thing sometimes you got to go off your gut instinct when you're building productions. If you have an idea in your head, go for it, because I didn't put an organ in because I thought this is going to sound good with it. I literally just, the thought of organ just popped into my head. So I thought, hey, I'm just going to lay down some organ and see what that happens. And turns out the end result was actually quite nice. Adds a little bit more lift in the high end. But I wanted it to be subtle because I didn't want it to cut through, because in the verses it's there a lot more prominently. So yeah, so that was the whole thinking behind that, which leads us on to the last thing, which is the string section. Now this is a very interesting point, and I'm so tempted to make a separate video on this, because building a string section, it can be very easy. It can be done in these 4 to 5 different tracks. The rule of building a simple string section for beginners, this is what I really want to go through for you now to emphasize it. So the first thing you want to do is you want 5 different string tracks, and then you're going to put it into a track stack. I'm just trying to stop my piano from making noise there. So you put it into string track, 5 different elements now you've got to add. You've got to add the root, the body, the melodic value, the development, and the second development. Now, the reason why there's 2 developments, I will get onto that in a second, but most importantly, the first thing you want to add to build a successful string section is the root note. Kind of following the bass line. You just want to add a strings section in there, so more commonly on a bass it would be either the double bass or the cello playing this, and it's just playing the root note for each chord. Add a little bit of movement in there though, just in the triad. So that covers the low end of the strings. So now we've got the low end of the strings covered. We now want to cover what I call the body. So the body is basically just, anyone who laid down the string section simply would just play 2-handed chords over 2 octaves, like 2 lots of triads, maybe like a... just like that. And that you'd think that's your string section sorted, but it's not lazy, it's just it could sound a lot better, and you can add a lot more to a string section, because it would be very mid-heavy, because again, like I said with the piano, having 2 separate piano tracks, one for the lower, one for the mid to high, because it's the same principle being applied right here, because then all of a sudden you're covering a lot more of the frequency spectrum. So for this one, I then laid down the chords, very simple. And in with this. Already sounds great. For those of you wondering, by the way, what strings these are Omnisphere Hollywood strings. Big fan of these, love them, use them a lot. The studio strings by Logic is very good, you just got to get the settings right. I moved away from the studio strings though, because I just decided to pay a little bit more money for Omnisphere. And by little I mean £300, that's what it set you off, but it was worth every penny in my opinion. So, but again, the same principle applies to any string. So if you've got studio strings in Logic, or you're just using some strings from a different DAW, this method still applies, by the way, so don't worry about that. Now, the next thing, very important, is the melodic value, is what I've called it. Now, the melodic value is all about now adding movement to your string section, adding that movement to keep it interesting, engaging. So then what I do is I just mess around. I just came with the first thing that came to me, and it was this little melodic pattern which plays in the background. Just to create that movement down the string section, because the one thing I love about a string section, if done properly, it speaks to you throughout the song. It applies that emotion to songs. That's what I love about string instruments, especially violin as well. Part of the reason why the violin was actually the first instrument that I learned when I was younger, because with the string section, there's something about it which has a very humanistic quality to it, and it can be very hard to replicate with MIDI, but if you stack it enough like you've done here, it initiates a feeling that you wouldn't have if you didn't have a string section in the song. And especially, this is an acoustic ballad at the end of the day, so we need that ballad point to come across, which has emotion, and the strings can apply that. So now we have the root, the body, the melodic value, we now need the development. And the development comes into two parts, mainly so then we can spread these strings throughout the song. Now, the first development will always, I've put it as a second development for this for some reason, but the first development will always instigate the higher area frequencies of the string section. So we're talking high notes, really high up the octave, bright. So this adds a lift to a song, and that's why I call it development, because if you're playing the body and the root, it can be very sort of like mid to low. So when you add development number 1 or development 2 in this production, all of a sudden you get a lift in the strings, which I've done here for the second pre-chorus of the song. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just first going to play it without the development so you can hear it. So this is a pre. Now listen to it with the development 2, the bright strings. Just sounds a lot more uplifting. Now notice as well that the chords are rising as well. That is to create some sort of a transition which helps it build from the pre-chorus to the chorus. So when you're laying down chords, don't just think I'm going to play a D, a G, an A, and B minor, whatever the order's in. You got to think as well, is the chord pattern descending? Am I going down the piano or am I going up? Because it creates two different feels. I always find normally that a chorus you want to end in a cadence. So in a chorus you might actually go down your keyboard more because it feels like it's coming down, 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 and it's going to finish on that cadence, to finish on that root chord. But if you're trying to build to something, when you think of building, you think of rising, 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 rising. So that's why you might think you want to go up the chords. So the chords for the song is B minor. I'm going to get the piano up here so I can give you the example. So D, of course it doesn't play when I want it to. That's because it's on that. There we go. So we've got D. So the chord is D. So let's just say we've got a chord pattern of D, A, B minor, G. So if I'm playing on the keyboard here, so D, in the chorus I might go like that, but in the pre-chorus if I want it to build, I might start going up the piano, so like that. So that's how I could basically describe it for you. So again, just always think about what direction your chord's going as well, because it's a very good way to, without doing too much, adding too many rises, you're actually starting to make a build for the song. And again, it's all about development. So when we get to development number 2 is a second melody to accompany the melodic value. To continue that movement, add a counter melody. I would actually think it's better. I actually decided to change now. If you have the development and then always have the counter melody, because that's what this development is. It's called the counter melody. And I've just noticed I'm blocking that, but it says counter melody on there. So this is just a second melody, which as you can see, I've stretched out long. So it really adds that sort of movement and something different. And you can see the chord pattern on average is going down because we're ending on a cadence, ending that chorus with the cadence. So when you put it all together for the string section, you get this really nice emotional full sound. And we've only used 5 tracks, but it sounds massive. So yeah, this is it. And yeah, that is the production overall. As you can see, using this standard practice with the rule of 5, I'll call it, with the strings, you can build a really good string section. And just to finish off, I just put a reverb on it, just a really big reverb. I think it's like 4 or 5 seconds to create the space to make it sound less MIDI, and use the chorus effect for modulation, where I've put the intensity mixed to 100%, but then the rate to 0.33 Hertz, meaning that the strings are pushed right to the sides of the mix. So when a vocal is added to this type beat from an artist who purchases this beat, they have the room for their vocal to really stick through. So yeah guys, that is the beat. I'm now going to play it from a substantial point in the song so you can listen to it through for full effect. So yeah guys, that was the beat breakdown for today. If you enjoyed this video, smash the subscribe button as it's the best way to support the channel, and also comment below any recommendations for beats that I should make in certain genres in the future and break down for you in future videos. So yeah guys, thank you for watching this video. Keep making music and I will see you in the next video.